The next column is birth here, which means birthing difficulty. If a doe had a terrible time in the birthing process, you can mark that she had a terrible time with 5 is difficult. If you want to keep track of that, if it was just minor or no problem, it would be a 1 or a 2 that you could put in there. But sometimes, if a doe has 3 or 4 kids, it may affect the milk production and her getting started off on her record, and you may want to note the record there by saying that it was a difficult birth. Okay, so your doe is freshened. We have kid, identity, or sire in here for the next group of columns. Kid, tattoo, tag, or other allows you to identify all the kids that were born to that doe. Now, all the doe kids and all the buck kids, which is some features that have not been allowed before. You put the sire's registration or the sire's name at the bottom of that. So there's two rows in here that you have to work with. Okay, for the kid ID code, if you had 2 doe kids, you would write in 2D. If you had 2 buck kids, you would write in 2B to identify how many were in that. So you have room for as many as the doe is allowed to have, 7 if it goes as high as that, and you can split it out as to 3 doe kids and 4 buck kids, or 3D and 4B. There's room for that. There's also a section down in here of death codes if something has happened, if the doe or the kid was born dead, died from a disease, died from a respiratory disease of some sort, or died for any unknown reason. This ID number section in here allows you to identify those kids. With identification in here, then you will be able to understand your kid identity listing that you receive after all your does have kidded. What I've been suggesting to most of the goat producers is if you don't want to give that an ID number, say this is the first doe that is kidded for the first time in the year, for this year, you may want to put in there 9801 and just continue from there so you can keep track of which kid was born first to which doe, and you'll understand then when you look at your kid identity listing form what's going on here. Or you can use names if you'd rather choose to do that. Okay, old reproductive status is the last column in here. This is the reproductive status from the last test. So all the information that you gave us last month will appear here. Now in the milk weight section, National DHIA has rules that pertain to the milk weight section. Okay? A doe is too fresh up until the 6th day after she is kidded. So she has to be fresh 6 or more days to have her milk weighed. And that needs to be sampled beginning the evening milking of the 6th day or after kidding, 6th day after kidding. If you're using the APCS code, it is the morning of the 7th day according to the National DHI rules. So for instance, say February 1 is when the doe kidded and you are doing a test February 4th, for argument's sake, you would write in here too fresh because we would not record the milk weights for that doe. As our program is developed for the DHI laboratory for goats, we've found that we needed more information available to the producers. And one of the things we put together was a DHI lab training package. It goes through the type of tests that are available for goats. It gives you definitions for terminology you may not understand. And it also answers some other questions that are commonly asked to us by goat producers and testers alike. There is National Dairy Herd Improvement Program Uniform Operating Procedures. These procedures were established or effective February 1, 1997. They are still reworking some of these, but in these procedures it talks about uniform data collection, and it also talks about procedures that apply to dairy goats only. For instance, one of the big things that comes up is does freshening 10 days or more prior to the expected kidding date whether in milk or dry, will be coded as abnormal, and the record initiated will not be used for buck and doe evaluations. So they consider it almost like the doe had aborted. Here's another one. If a doe aborts while in milk and has carried a kid less than 80 days, her current record will continue without interruption. There's also a guideline in here for the group testing plan in which the cow industry does not use, but the dairy goat industry has adopted. So make sure you read through those procedures if there's any questions as to when a sample should be taken and how does it apply to the dairy goats. The kid identity listing is something that the producers may be using a lot more than the tester would, but if you as a tester do use this, you would ask the producer to go through this and identify which kids they're going to keep and want a registration paper on, which kids have died or been sold. One of the things we're trying to develop is a registration paper that is acceptable to ADGA that will be kicked out as at the request of the producer and come back pre-printed with all this information already on it. Every box of samples that is sent in to us and every empty box that you get back as a tester or as a producer will always have an invoice in there. And of course we do have to charge for this service. On the first line we need the herd code number of that herd and the herd name, the date of the test, the supervisor name and number, which you would know after the second test. If this is your first test, just put your name in, print your name in there and write new. Is this a verification test, yes or no? We need this circled because we come in then when ADGA calls us and asks for those verification tests. It's just easier for us to find it. If the supervisor or the tester is receiving any money, that charge would go in here. Say, for instance, $10 to come out and run the test that month. If you choose to have FICA and workman's comp taken out and the supervisor travel by miles, there's lines for that. I can tell you that the supervisor travel by miles is not taxed, whereas the supervisor charges is taxed. So I will let that up to the producer and the tester to make their decision as to how they're going to fill this out. If the tester is shipping the samples for the producer and wants to be reimbursed for that, a receipt is required in this section along with how much that costs. There's a service affiliate fee, which is a fee that belongs to National DHI and to Texas DHI. They charge a membership fee to keep these animals in the system. So you look at your DMS 201 barn sheet and add up the numbers on that barn sheet and times it times 8 cents. 6 cents of that goes to National DHI and 2 cents of that goes to Texas DHI. Since we are taking over the processing of the paperwork, we have worked up a herd processing fee. On the barn sheet, if there are 0 to 20 goats, the charge is $4. That $4 includes receiving the kid identity listing after the does have kidded, all of the does have kidded in the herd, and receiving doe pages after all the does have been dried off or have reached their 305. Other than that, there's additional charges. The milk analysis is the total number of goats or total number of milk samples submitted times $1.15. That includes butterfat, protein, and somatic cell counts. We charge $1.15 because that's how much it costs us to run those samples. We're the only ones that purchase goat milk standards, so therefore our price is extremely high. If we had other DHI labs that were interested in purchasing that, I'm sure that our price would go down a little bit on the standard section of it. But this $1.15 also includes mailing the box back to the producer.